that entire island is huge. Also has no electricity and so many villages. So that's another cluster that we have included here. And then finally, we have a cluster around Lake Albert in the west. And those are shore sites, landing sites along the lake that we have put together in the final cluster. Eventually, each of those clusters has about 23 to 50 villages altogether. And ultimately, we are looking at electrifying 100 to 150 villages under this program. The number to be clarified closer to the RFP phase of the program, because we'll take people out in the field to verify all the sites before we launch the actual tender. And 20,000 to 30,000 connections are what we are looking at to achieve under this program. So in this case, we are looking at the technology selection that we considered for this is really solar PV. Bidders and developers will have freedom of choice when it comes to the solutions that they choose in terms of metering and inverter storage. The best case is really considering a ground-mounted solar PV and battery storage system. They still have choice on the battery type, but it's likely going to be lithium-ion, depending. There's likely to be a diesel generator backup system, optional, but it's limited to producing about 15% of the annual production from the mini-grid. If you do have a diesel genset, we expect to have smart metering, but we have some technologies that are not included. So wind and hydro and biomass are not included under this tender. And the LV network has to be built according to the grid code, because eventually the grid may arrive, and this is particularly important for the mini-grids that will be on the mainland. I think there might be some flexibility for the island mini-grids, where the grid may never come. So supply has to be 24 hours a day. The productive use of energy we have a budget for this under the Get Access program, about 3 million euros. And it's a critical aspect of the program to be included. We shall have a consultant who will implement this across all the clusters. And we shall have multiple types of grants and loans offered to households and businesses. And the scope for input and collaboration with other agencies is welcome, who have already implemented some of these PUE activities. The program is going to be guided by the regulatory guidelines that have been developed by the regulator, ERA. This is already known to you. I won't go into details here. There's going to be, there's still some discussion on the concession period, 10 years, 15 years, or 15 years and 20 years. So the islands will get a longer concession period, 15 to 20 years, and the mainland will have 10 to 15 years of concession for the mini-grid developers. So environmental aspects are key. Developers will have to comply with international IFC standards as required by the donors, and a lot of the other aspects will be covered in the tender documents that will be launched later during the implementation of the program. So the tariff and subsidy approach that we are considering, we have a tariff cap already for the program and the mini-grid sites. It's about 29 cents, and that's already been agreed in writing with the regulator. The subsidy approach, we consider three scenarios. The first one was to subsidize the capital investment. The second one was to subsidize the connections. And then the third was to top up the tariff that consumers would pay to developers. And eventually, after a qualitative and quantitative analysis, we saw that the best approach for subsidy under this program would be the capital-based grant financing. So we want to have a tariff top-up, and the connections will also be subsidized by the government, but the program will cover the capital grant for the developers and subsidy for that. So developers will therefore have to submit their bids based on a fixed capital subsidy. So since the tariff is fixed, the bids are really going to be based on how big a tariff the developers require. So the less the tariff, the more likely the bidder will be awarded. But it's really not like a pro-mini grids. It was a bid based on the tariffs. So the one who had the lowest tariff had a better chance of winning. In this case, since the tariff is already fixed by the regulator, they are really bidding on the capital subsidy required for their project. So a bit of a difference there. So the subsidy payments will be made by the donor agencies through KFW. Government is also going to make the contribution there. And these connections have to be verified independently. There will be another consultant for monitoring and verification. And so the whole thing is to allow developers recoup their capital expenditure. Right, so this diagram that I'm sharing on the screen is tentative. It may change at the point of RFP, but I include it here because we are interested in getting an idea and some feedback on how the subsidies will be disbursed. So essentially, what we are going to have is that after the award of the tender to the winning bidders, we shall have the bidders will get into achievement of financial close, and they also have to have a subcontract for the development of the distribution grid. So in this case, the developers will build the distribution grids themselves, the low voltage distribution grids. I think previously the government was doing this for developers. I think the key difference here is that even though the developers will build the grid, the money will actually come from the program. But the supervision of the construction of the grid is done by the developers. So that means that once the award has been given and they have a contract with a construction contractor, they will receive 20% of the subsidy amount to assist in facilitating the construction of the grid. So no money really out of pocket necessarily. It's going to come straight through from the program. And then the other payment will be happening at the end of year 0. And here we're assuming that developers can build the grids within a period of 1 year, or at least achieve 90% construction of the mini grids. And once they achieve 90% of those mini grids in the cluster of 25 to 50 sites, they then can receive the other 20% of the capital subsidy payment. And then after 2 years of successful operation, and they have connected about 50% of the required or anticipated connections under the cluster, they'll get the other 20%. And in the 3rd or 4th year, they will be reimbursed for connections that they will have made during the 3rd and the 4th year. And then finally, 30% of the subsidy will be paid